St. Mary Mead looks sleepy, but secrets lurk in every corner. A Miss Jane Marple, an elderly lady with a knack for noticing what others miss, is on the case. When priceless books disappear from the manor, important letters vanish from the post. Office and a church window is smashed. The village buzzes with suspicion. A planted key, a wax smudge, a stranger's limp. Miss Marple sees it all. Can this clever sleuth outsmart a cunning thief before they strike again? Unravel the mystery. In a village where nothing escapes her sharp eyes? Chapter 1. The quiet village of St. Mary Mead. The sun peeked over the green hills of St. Mary Mead, painting the village in soft gold. It was a quiet morning, the kind where birds chirped and the air smelled of fresh grass. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cozy garden, her knitting needles clicking softly. Her small cottage, with its neat rose bushes and white fence, looked like a picture from a storybook. She wore a simple wool dress and a shawl, her silver hair tucked under a neat hat. At first glance, she seemed like any old lady in the village, but her sharp blue eyes missed nothing. St. Mary Mead was a tiny place where everyone knew everyone else. The butcher, Mr. Hobbs, waved to the baker, Mrs. Price, every morning. Children ran through the cobblestone streets laughing as they played. The village had a post office, a small church, and a tea shop called Daisy's, where folks gathered to chat. Miss Marple loved this routine. It was her world, and she knew its rhythms like a song. But today, something felt off. She sipped her tea, watching a blackbird hop across her garden. Her neighbor, Mrs. Clement, the vicar's wife, had mentioned something odd at breakfast. A stranger had come to the village, a man in a fancy coat, carrying a leather case. He'd stayed at the Blue Boar Inn, asking questions about the old manor house on the hill. The manor belonged to Colonel Bantry and his wife Dolly, Miss Marple's good friends. The stranger's questions had made Mrs. Clement uneasy, though she couldn't say why. Miss Marple's needles paused. Strangers weren't rare in St. Mary Mead, but they usually came for a wreath on a wedding, a funeral, or to visit family. This man, though, seemed different. Mrs. Clement said he had sharp eyes and a quick way of talking, that he was hiding something. Miss Marple didn't like jumping to conclusions, but her mind was already working. Turning over possibilities like a puzzle, she set her knitting down and walked to her gate, looking toward the village square. The tea shop would be buzzing by now, and if there was news, Daisy's was the place to hear it. She adjusted her hat, picked up her basket, and headed down the lane. The cobblestones felt familiar under her sturdy shoes, and she nodded to passers-by. Young Tommy from the grocer's, old Mr. Giles with his cane. They all smiled back, used to seeing Miss Marple out and about. Daisy's tea shop was a cheerful spot with lace curtains and tables covered in checkered cloths. The bell above the door jingled as Miss Marple stepped inside. A few villagers sat at tables, talking in low voices. Mrs. Price, the baker, was at the counter, her round face flushed from the morning's work. "Morning, Miss Marple," she called. "Scone and tea as usual." "Yes, please," Miss Marple said, settling at a corner table. From here she could see everyone and hear their chatter. She didn't eavesdrop. Not exactly, she just listened. People often said more than they meant to, especially when they thought no one was paying attention. Mrs. Price brought over a steaming teapot and a scone with jam. "Heard about the stranger at the Blue Boar?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. Miss Marple nodded, her face calm, but her ears sharp. "Mrs. Clement mentioned him." "A visitor, is he?" "What?" Mrs. Price leaned closer, her voice dropping. "What?" "Calls himself Mr. Finch. Says he's a writer, looking for old houses to put in a book. Who lives there? How long they've stayed? Even what they do all day. Bit nosy, if you ask me." Miss Marple spread jam on her scone, her movements slow and thoughtful. "Writers can be curious," she said. "Perhaps he's just thorough." Mrs. Price snorted. "Thorough. He was poking around the manor gates yesterday, peering over the wall. Colonel Bantry wasn't happy, I hear." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. Colonel Bantry was a gruff old man who liked his privacy. If this Mr. Finch was snooping, it would certainly ruffle feathers. "Did he say anything else?" she asked, taking a small bite. Mrs. Price glanced around, then whispered, "He asked about the Colonel's library." Said he heard there's rare books up there. Funny thing is, nobody in the village ever mentioned those books to him. Miss Marple's fingers tightened slightly on her teacup. Colonel Bantry had inherited a collection of old books. Some said they were worth a fortune. She'd seen them once, dusty tomes with leather covers tucked away in a locked room. If Mr. Finch knew about them, he'd either done his homework or heard something he shouldn't have. "Thank you, Mrs. Price," Miss Marple said, her voice gentle. "You always know what's going on." Mrs. Price beamed and bustled off to serve another customer. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind racing. A stranger asking about rare books wasn't necessarily trouble, but it was interesting. Thought of young Billy, the postman's son, and sometimes not so foolish things. The bell jingled again, and Dolly Bantry swept in, her hat slightly askew. She was a cheerful woman, always dressed in bright colors. But today, her face was pinched with worry. "Thank goodness you're here," Dolly said, her voice low. "Something's wrong at the manor, and I don't know what to make of it." Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression kind but alert. "What's happened, Dolly?" Dolly leaned forward, her hands twisting her scarf. "It's that Mr. Finch. He came to the manor this morning, bold as brass, asking to see Arthur's library. Said he's writing a book about old collections. Arthur told him to leave, but then, no, Jane, I found something odd in the library afterward." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face stayed calm. "Odd how?" "A book was missing," Dolly whispered. "One of the rare ones. A first edition worth hundreds. Arthur swears he locked the library door, but it was open when I checked, and there was a window unlatched, too." Miss Marple's mind clicked like her knitting needles. A missing book, an unlatched window, and a nosy stranger. It was a puzzle, and she loved puzzles. "Did you tell the police?" she asked. Dolly shook her head. "Arthur says it's probably nothing. He thinks one of the maids left the window open, but I'm not so sure. That Mr. Finch gives me the creeps." Miss Marple patted Dolly's hand. "Don't worry, dear. I'm sure it'll sort itself out. Why don't you invite me to the manor tomorrow? I'd love to see your roses." Dolly smiled, relieved. "You're a gem, Jane. Come for tea at 3. As Dolly left, Miss Marple finished her scone, her thoughts spinning. She didn't believe in coincidences. A stranger asking about rare books, a missing first edition, an open window, it all pointed to something deliberate. She thought of Mrs. Harris, a village widow who'd once lost a silver spoon to a visitor who turned out to be a thief. People underestimated St. Mary Mead, thinking it too small for secrets, but Miss Marple knew better. Small places held big stories. She paid for her tea and stepped outside, the sun now high in the sky. The village looked peaceful, but she felt a prickle of excitement. Something was brewing, and she intended to find out what. She'd visit the manor tomorrow, have a look at that library, and maybe chat with the maids. People talked freely, too. An old lady with a kind smile, and Miss Marple was very good at listening as she walked home. She noticed young Tommy from the grocer's kicking a stone along the lane. He looked up and grinned. "Afternoon, Miss Marple. Seen that stranger yet?" "Not yet, Tommy," she said, smiling back. "But I expect I will." Tommy laughed and ran off. Miss Marple's smile faded slightly. She thought of the unlatched window, the missing book, and Mr. Finch's sharp eyes. In her experience, people who asked too many questions often had something to hide. And if Mr. Finch was hiding something, she'd find it. She always did. Back in her cottage, she picked up her knitting, the needles clicking again. The blackbird sang outside, and the village hummed along, unaware of the mystery unfolding. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. St. Mary Mead might be quiet, but it was never dull not when she was watching. Chapter 2. The mysterious incident. The sun dipped low over St. Mary Mead, casting long shadows across the village. Miss Jane Marple sat by her fireplace, her knitting needles clicking steadily. The evening was cool, and her cozy cottage felt warm with the glow of a single lamp. She'd spent the day thinking about Dolly Bantry's words at the tea shop, a missing book, an unlatched window, and that stranger, Mr. Finch. Her mind buzzed like a beehive, piecing together the bits of gossip she'd heard. something wasn't right, and she could feel it in her bones. The next morning, Miss Marple dressed in her usual neat wool skirt and cardigan, her silver hair tucked under a sensible hat. She picked up her basket, slipped in a small notebook, and headed to the manor house on the hill. The walk was pleasant, with birds singing and a soft breeze rustling the trees. The manor, a grand old place with ivy-covered walls, stood at the edge of the village. Its tall windows gleamed, but today it seemed to hold a secret. Dolly Bantry greeted her at the door, her face still tight with worry. "Jane, I'm so glad you're here," she said, leading her inside. The hall was lined with old paintings, and a grand staircase curved upward. "Arthur's in a mood, but he'll be glad to see you." Colonel Bantry was in the drawing room, puffing on his pipe. He was a tall man, with a red face and a mustache that twitched when he was cross. "Morning, Miss Marple," he grumbled. "Ellie's making a fuss over nothing, you know. A book's gone, that's all. Probably misplaced it myself." Marple smiled gently. "I'm sure it's nothing serious, Colonel. But may I see the library? I've always admired your collection." Colonel grunted but led the way. The library was a large room with high shelves crammed with books. Motes danced in the sunlight, streaming through a tall window. Miss Marple's eyes scanned the room, noting the heavy oak door, the brass lock, and the window Dolly had mentioned. It was shut now, but the latch looked loose, as if it could be jiggled open with little effort. "Which book is missing?" she asked, her voice mild. The colonel pointed to a gap on a shelf near the window. "A first edition of some old novel. Worth a bit, I suppose." "Never read it myself." Dolly frowned. "It's worth hundreds, Arthur, and you always lock this room. How could it just vanish?" Miss Marple stepped closer to the shelf, her sharp eyes catching a faint smudge on the wood, a fingerprint perhaps, or a mark from a glove. She didn't touch it, but made a mental note. "Was anyone else in here recently?" she asked. "Just the maids," Dolly said. "Mr. Finch, when he came asking questions."
"Esther."
"Arthur sent him packing."
"Esther."
Miss Marple nodded, her face calm but her mind racing. She glanced at the window again. The sill was clean, but outside, the flower bed looked trampled, as if someone had stood there. "Mind if I take a look outside?"
"What?"
she asked. The colonel shrugged. "Go ahead. Nothing to see, I'll wager." Outside, Miss Marple knelt by the flower bed, her knees creaking a bit. The soil was soft, and there it was, a clear footprint, too large for a maid's shoe. She pulled out her notebook and sketched it quickly, noting the pattern of the sole. It wasn't much, but it was something. She thought of young Tommy, who'd once left muddy prints all over his mother's kitchen. After sneaking apples, footprints told stories if you knew how to read them. Back inside, Dolly poured tea in the drawing room. "What do you think, Jane?" she asked, her voice low. "Is it that Mr. Finch?" Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes thoughtful. "It's too early to say, Dolly, but I'd like to meet this Mr. Finch. Is he still at the Blue Boar?" Dolly nodded. "Mrs. Price saw him there this morning, asking more questions. It's got the whole village talking." Miss Marple smiled. "Then I'll have a chat with him. It's just a friendly one, of course." After tea, she walked back to the village, her basket swinging. The Blue Boar Inn was a small, tidy place with a creaky sign and flower boxes under the windows. Inside, the air smelled of ale and wood smoke. Mr. Finch sat at a corner table. It's a slim man with sharp eyes and a neatly trimmed beard. He was writing in a notebook, his leather case beside him. Miss Marple approached, her smile as warm as a grandmother's. "Good afternoon," she said. "You must be Mr. Finch. I'm Jane Marple, a friend of the Bantrys. I hear you're writing a book." Mr. Finch looked up, his eyes narrowing for a split second before he smiled. "Miss Marple, a pleasure?" "Yes, I'm researching old libraries. The colonel's collection is quite something, isn't it?" "Quite," she said, sitting down. "Though I hear there's been a spot of trouble up there. A missing book, they say." His smile didn't waver, but his fingers tightened. On his pen. "A shame," he said. "Old books do get misplaced, or borrowed, perhaps. No?" Miss Marple tilted her head, her eyes bright. "Borrowed? Without asking? That would be bold." Mr. Finch laughed, but it sounded forced. "Just a thought. I'm sure it'll turn up. They chatted for a few minutes, Miss Marple asking about his book and his travels. He answered smoothly, but she noticed how his eyes flicked to the door, as if he expected someone. She thought of Mrs. Harris's thief, who'd been charming until caught with her silver spoon. Charm could hide a lot, she knew. As she left the inn, the village clock struck 4. The square was busy now, with children playing and carts rumbling. "Bye!" Miss Marple paused, watching Mr. Finch through the inn's window. He was talking to a young man she didn't recognize, their heads close together. The young man looked nervous, his hands fidgeting. Miss Marple's lips pursed. 2 strangers. In St. Mary Mead? That was no coincidence. She walked home, her mind turning over the day's clues, the footprint, the smudge, Mr. Finch's quick answers. Back in her cottage, she sat by the fire, her knitting untouched. She thought of a village girl, years ago, who'd stolen a necklace and blamed a maid. The girl had fidgeted just like that young man at the inn. Guilt had a way of showing itself if you watched closely. Miss Marple decided to visit Daisy's tea shop again tomorrow. The village gossip would be flowing, and she might hear more about Mr. Finch's friend. She also wanted to talk to the Bantry's maids. Servants saw things others missed, and a kind word often loosened tongues. For now, she'd keep her thoughts to herself. Puzzle was only fun when you had all the pieces, and she was still collecting hers, as the fire crackled. She smiled. St. Mary Mead might seem sleepy, but it had its secrets. And Miss Jane Marple was very good at finding them. Chapter 3. The Web of Suspects. The morning mist hung low over St. Mary Mead, wrapping the village in a soft gray blanket. Miss Jane Marple stepped out of her cottage, her basket tucked under her arm. Sensible shoes clicked on the cobblestones as she headed toward the manor house. Yesterday's visit had left her with questions: the footprint in the flower bed, the smudge on the shelf, and Mr. Finch's quick smile at the Blue Boar Inn. Now, there was another stranger in the mix, the nervous young man she'd seen with Finch. Her mind hummed like a busy loom, weaving threads of clues at the manor. Dolly Bantry was pacing the drawing room, her bright scarf fluttering. "Jane, you're a lifesaver," she said, her voice tight. "Things are worse. Another book's gone missing, another first edition." Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted, but her face stayed calm. "When did you notice?" "This morning," Dolly said. Arthur checked the library after breakfast. The lock was fine, but another book was gone from the same shelf, and that window was unlatched again. Colonel Bantry stormed in, his mustache bristling. "It's those blasted maids," he growled. "One of 'em's careless or worse. I'm calling the police." Miss Marple tilted her head. "Perhaps we should talk to the maids first, Colonel. They might know something useful." The colonel huffed, but agreed. Dolly called for the 2 maids, Sarah and Lily, who worked at the manor. Sarah was a sturdy girl with rosy cheeks, while Lily was younger, with quick, nervous hands. They stood by the fireplace, looking uneasy under the colonel's glare. "Girls," Miss Marple said gently, "have you noticed anything odd in the library? A visitor, perhaps, or something out of place?" Sarah shook her head. "No, ma'am. I dust the shelves every week, but I don't touch the books. The colonel's particular about them." Lily fidgeted, twisting her apron. I saw someone near the manor 2 nights ago," she whispered, "by the garden late. I thought it was a shadow, but it moved fast." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. "Near the library window?" she asked. Lily nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "I didn't say anything because I wasn't sure." The colonel snorted. "Shadows. Probably a cat." "Yeah." Miss Marple smiled kindly at Lily. "Thank you, dear. That's helpful." She thought of old Mr. Giles, who'd once sworn he saw a ghost in his barn. It turned out to be a boy stealing apples. Shadows often had human shapes. After the maids left, Miss Marple asked to see the library again. The room was as grand as before, with its tall shelves and heavy curtains. She checked the window still loose, with another faint mark on the sill like a hand had rested there. The flower bed outside had fresh footprints, deeper than the last. She sketched them in her notebook, noting they matched the first. Someone was getting bold. Back in the drawing room, Dolly poured tea, her hands shaking. "Jane, what if it's not just books? What if someone's planning something worse?" Miss Marple patted her hand. "Let's not worry yet, Dolly." Pop into the village and see what folks are saying. She headed to Daisy's tea shop, where the air buzzed with gossip. Mrs. Price, the baker, was at the counter, her eyes wide. "Miss Marple, have you heard? Mr. Finch has a friend now, a young man staying at the Blue Boar. They're thick as thieves, those two." Miss Marple settled at her usual table, her tea steaming. "A friend? What's he like?" Mrs. Price leaned in. "Calls himself Tom Reed. Shy, keeps to himself, but always with Finch. They were whispering about the manor yesterday, something about getting it done quick. I heard them myself." Miss Marple's fingers paused on her teacup. She thought of the nervous young man at the inn, his fidgeting hands. "Interesting," she said. "Anything else?" Mrs. Price nodded. "Tom was asking about the manor's back gate. Said he's a gardener, but he didn't look like one. No dirt on his hands." Miss Marple smiled. "You're a sharp one, Mrs. Price." She sipped her tea, her mind spinning. A gardener with clean hands was as odd as a baker with no flour on her apron. She remembered a village lad who'd claimed to be a painter but carried no brushes. He'd been after Mrs. Harris's silver. She left the tea shop and strolled toward the church, where she often met Mrs. Clement, the vicar's wife. Mrs. Clement was tending the flower beds, her gloves muddy. "Jane, you look thoughtful," she said, brushing dirt from her hands. "Just curious," Miss Marple said. "Have you seen that young man with Mr. Finch? Tom Reed, they say?" Mrs. Clement frowned. "Yes, yesterday. He was near the church, looking at the manor through the trees. I thought he was lost, but he scurried off when I called out." Miss Marple's lips pursed. The manor, the library, the back gate, everything circled back to Colonel Bantry's books. I thanked Mrs. Clement and walked home, her basket swinging. At her cottage, she sat by the window, her knitting untouched. The suspects were forming a web, Mr. Finch with his slick charm, Tom Reed, nervous and out of place. And the maids, though Lily's story about the shadow felt honest, she thought of a village scandal years ago. A stranger had charmed his way into homes, stealing trinkets. He'd had a helper, a quiet boy who watched the houses. Mr. Finch and Tom Reed felt like a pair, each playing a part. But why the books? And why now? As the sun set, Miss Marple lit her lamp. The village was quiet, but she knew trouble was stirring. Tomorrow, she'd visit the Blue Boar again, maybe catch Tom Reed alone. Nervous people often slipped up, and she was very good at listening. For now, she picked up her knitting, the needles, clicking like a clock. A web was tightening, and she was ready to tug the next thread. Chapter 4. Digging deeper, the sun climbed high over St. Mary Mead, its light filtering through the trees as Miss Jane Marple walked the familiar path to the village square. Her basket swung lightly, but her mind was heavy with thoughts. The missing books, the footprints, Mr. Finch's smooth talk. And Tom asked Tom Reed's nervous glances. Each clue was a piece of the puzzle she was determined to solve. Her sharp eyes missed nothing, and today she aimed to uncover more. At Daisy's tea shop, the air buzzed with the usual chatter. Mrs. Price was behind the counter, her apron dusted with flour. "Miss Marple, you're early today," she said. "Pouring tea, heard the latest?" "The police were at the manor this morning." Miss Marple settled at her corner table, her face calm, but her ears alert. "The police? What happened?" Mrs. Price leaned closer, her voice low. "Colonel Bantry called them about those missing books. They think it's one of the maids, Sarah, the older one. Found a key in her room, looks like it fits the library door." Miss Marple's fingers paused on her teacup. Sarah, the sturdy maid with rosy cheeks, hadn't seemed the type, but people could surprise you. She thought of Mrs. Harris's nephew, who'd seemed honest until he pawned her brooch. "A key?" she asked. "That's curious," Mrs. Price nodded. "The Colonel's furious. Says Sarah's been with them years, but the police are questioning her now." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind racing. Key in Sarah's room felt too neat, like a breadcrumb left to be found. She thanked Mrs. Price and headed to the manor, where Dolly Bantry met her at the gate, her face pale. "Jane, it's awful," Dolly said, wringing her hands. "Sarah's in tears, swears she didn't take anything. The police found the key under her mattress hidden, they say, but I can't believe she'd steal. Miss Marple patted Dolly's arm. May I speak? With Sarah? Quick word might help. Dolly led her to the kitchen, where Sarah sat, her eyes red from crying. The police had left, but the air felt heavy. Sarah looked up, her voice shaky. I didn't do it, Miss Marple. That key's not mine.
Ow.
I never go near the library except to dust? Miss Marple's eyes softened. Tell me, Sarah, when did you last see the library key? Sarah sniffled. The colonel keeps it in his desk. I saw it there last week when I tidied. Swear I never touched it. Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning. The key moved from a desk to a mattress sounded like a setup. She thought of a village boy who'd hidden a stolen watch in his sister's. Room to shift blame. People played tricks when they wanted to hide their own guilt. Anyone new? Been near the house? Miss Marple asked. Besides Mr. Finch. Sarah hesitated. There was that young man, Tom Reed. He came by 2 days ago, said he was checking the garden for weeds. Asked to use the back door to wash his hands. I let him in, but he was only a minute. Miss Marple's lips pursed. Tom Reed, the nervous one from the inn. A minute was enough to slip a key somewhere it shouldn't be. Thank you, Sarah, she said gently. You've been very helpful. Outside, Miss Marple walked to the library window again. The flower bed still showed those deep footprints, and she noticed something new, a scrap of cloth caught on a thorn, dark blue like a man's jacket. She tucked it into her basket, her mind clicking like her knitting needles. The footprints, the cloth, Tom Reed's visit was adding up. But not to Sarah. She headed to the Blue Boar Inn, hoping to catch Tom Reed alone. The inn was quiet, its tables mostly empty. Mr. Finch was nowhere in sight, but Tom sat in a corner, his hands fidgeting over a mug of ale. Miss Marple approached, her smile warm and harmless. Good afternoon, Mr. Reed, she said, sitting down. I'm Jane Marple, a friend of the Bantrys. I hear you're a gardener. The manor's roses are lovely this year. Tom's eyes darted up, wary. Yes, ma'am. Just passing through, helping where I can. Miss Marple tilted her head.
You were at the manor recently, weren't you?
Checking the garden? His fingers twitched. Just a quick look. Didn't stay long. She nodded, her eyes sharp behind her kind smile. Gardening's hard work. Odd. Though her hands are so clean. Most gardeners I know have dirt under their nails. Tom's face flushed, and he looked away. I wash up well, he mumbled. Miss Marple chatted a bit longer, asking about his travels, his plans. Tom's answers were short, his eyes flicking to the door. She thought of the village lad who'd stammered when caught with stolen apples. Guilt had a way of showing, if you watched closely as she left the inn. Miss Marple spotted Mr. Finch across the square, talking to a man in a dark coat. They stood close, their voices low. She couldn't hear them, but Finch's sharp gestures and the man's quick nods felt like a plan in motion. She thought of Mrs. Harris's thief, who'd had a partner to sell his stolen goods. Finch and Demand maybe this new man were a team, she was sure. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting untouched. The clues were piling up. The footprints, the cloth, the key planted in Sarah's room, Tom's clean hands. The police were chasing the wrong thread, but she was weaving the right one. She remembered a village scandal where a maid was blamed for missing silver, only for the real thief a guess to be caught later. Sarah was no thief, but someone wanted her to look like one. Tomorrow, she'd talk to Lily, the younger maid, again. Lily's story about the shadow by the window might hold more details. Miss Marple also planned to check the village pawn shop. If those books were as valuable as Dolly said, someone might try to sell them. For now, she lit her lamp and stared, out at the quiet village. The web was tightening, and she was ready to pull the next string. Chapter 5. The turning point, the morning sun sparkled on the dew-soaked grass of St. Mary Mead, but Miss Jane Marple's mind was far from the peaceful village scene. Her basket swung as she walked toward the manor house, her thoughts tangled. With clues, the footprints, the scrap of cloth, Tom Reed's nervous twitches, and the key planted in Sarah's room. The police were convinced Sarah was the thief, but Miss Marple knew better. The real culprit was clever, hiding behind a web of distractions. Today she meant to tug that web and see what shook loose. At the manor, Dolly Bantry was in a state, her scarf knotted tightly. "Jane, it's dreadful," she cried, meeting her at the door. "Someone tried to break into the library last night. Arthur heard a noise, but whoever it was ran off before he could catch them." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. "The library again? Is anything taken?" Dolly shook her head. "No, but the window was wide open, and there's a scratch on the lock, like someone tried to force it." Colonel Bantry stomped in, his face red. "Enough's enough. I'm posting a guard tonight. This is getting out of hand." Miss Marple nodded calmly. "A wise idea, Colonel. May I see the library?" The library was as grand as ever, but the air felt heavy with secrets. The window was shut now, but the latch was scratched, and the sill had a fresh smudge grease, perhaps from a tool. Outside, the flower bed showed new footprints, overlapping the old ones. Miss Marple sketched them in her notebook, noting a slight difference in the tread. The same boots, but worn by someone moving faster, more desperate. She turned to Dolly. "You said Arthur heard a noise?" "What time was this?" "About midnight," Dolly said. "Was reading downstairs and heard a scrape, like metal on wood." Miss Marple's mind clicked. Midnight was bold for a thief, unless they thought the house was empty. She thought of a village boy who'd tried to steal eggs at night, only to trip over a rake. Clumsy moves often meant nerves or a rush to finish a job. "I'd like to." "Speak with Lily again," Miss Marple said. She mentioned a shadow before. She might have seen more. Dolly called Lily, the young maid, who shuffled in, her hands twisting her apron. "Miss Marple, I didn't see much," she said before any questions, "but last night I couldn't sleep. I looked out my window and saw someone by the library again, same spot as before." Miss Marple's voice was gentle. "Could you tell who it was? A man, perhaps? Tall or short?" Lily bit her lip. "Tall, I think, wearing a dark coat. He moved quick when the colonel shouted." Miss Marple smiled. "You're very observant, Lily. That's helpful." After Lily left, Miss Marple sat with Dolly over tea. "Dolly, do you know if Mr. Finch or Tom Reed were in the village last night?" Dolly frowned. "Mrs. Price said she saw them at the Blue Boar, but they left early, before 9. No one's seen them since." Miss Marple's fingers tapped her teacup. Tall man in a dark coat, moving fast. Mr. Finch was tall, and so was the stranger she'd seen with him in the square. Reed was shorter but nervous enough to run at a shout. The pieces were fitting, but the picture wasn't clear yet. She decided to visit the village pawn shop, run by old Mr. Turner, who knew every trinket that passed through St. Mary Mead. The shop was a cluttered place, filled with clocks, jewelry, and dusty books. Mr. Turner, a wiry man with thick glasses, looked up as she entered. "Miss Marple, what brings you here?" he asked, polishing a brass candlestick. "Just browsing," she said, her eyes scanning the shelves. "Have you had any rare books come in lately? Old ones, maybe from a collection?" Mr. Turner shook his head. "Not a one, though a fellow came by yesterday asking if I'd buy first editions. Said he might have some soon. Didn't give a name, but he had a beard and sharp eyes." Miss Marple's heart quickened. "Mr. Finch, did he say where he was staying?" "The Blue Boar," Mr. Turner said. Seemed in a hurry. She thanked him and left, her mind racing. Finch was planning to sell the books, but he hadn't yet. That meant they were still hidden, maybe at the inn or somewhere nearby. She thought of Mrs. Harris's thief, who'd stashed stolen silver in a barn before selling it. Thieves needed safe spots, and she'd find this one. Back in the village square, Miss Marple decided to set a small trap. She stopped by Daisy's tea shop and found Mrs. Price, always eager for a chat. "Mrs. Price," she said, her voice low, "I heard a rumor the colonel's hiring a night watchman for the manor. Someone to guard those books." Mrs. Price's eyes widened. "A watchman? Well, that'll scare off any thieves." Miss Marple smiled. "Spread the word, won't you? It's best everyone knows." She knew gossip traveled fast in St. Mary Mead. If Mr. Finch or Tom Reed heard about a watchman, they might panic and make a mistake. She thought of a village girl who dropped a stolen ring when she heard the police were coming. Fear loosened. Fingers. That evening, Miss Marple sat by her cottage window, watching the village settle into dusk. Her knitting lay untouched as she thought through her plan. She'd visit the Blue Boar tomorrow, maybe catch Tom Reed off guard. A nervous man was likely to slip, especially if he thought the net was closing. She also wanted to check the Manors. Back gate Mrs. Price had said Tom asked about it, and it might be their entry point. As the stars came out, Miss Marple lit her lamp. The attempted break-in was a turning point. The thief was getting desperate, which meant they'd act soon. She remembered a village scandal where a thief cornered had tried one last grab before fleeing, when she wouldn't let that happen here. The books belonged in the manor, and she'd make sure they stayed there. Her eyes gleamed in the lamplight. The trap was set, and St. Mary Mead's quiet night hit a game of wits. Miss Marple was ready to play. Chapter 6. Unraveling the truth, the morning air in St. Mary Mead was crisp, with a hint of autumn chill. Miss Jane Marple walked slowly toward the manor house, her basket swinging and her mind sharp as a tack. The clues had been piling up. Footprints. In the flower bed, a scrap of cloth, a planted key. And last night's failed break-in. Mr. Finch and Tom Reed were at the heart of it, she was sure, and the rumor she'd spread about a night watchman should have them rattled. Today, she planned to pull the threads together and expose the truth at the manor. Ellie Bantry was bustling about, setting out teacups in the drawing room. "Jane, you're a dear for coming," she said, her voice still shaky. "The police are back, poking around, but they're still after poor Sarah. I wish you'd talk sense into them." Miss Marple smiled gently. "I'll do my best, Dolly. But first, let's have everyone together, Sarah. Lily, the Colonel, and, if possible, Mr. Finch and Tom Reed. A little chat might clear things up." Dolly's eyes widened. "You want those to hear?" "Whatever for." "Just a hunch," Miss Marple said, her eyes twinkling. "Did you send a note to the Blue Boar, inviting them for tea? Say it's about the Colonel's library. They won't resist." While Dolly arranged the invitations, Miss Marple slipped into the library. The room was unchanged, its shelves heavy with books, the windows still bearing that scratched latch. She checked the flower bed outside one last time. The footprints were still there, but she noticed something new, a tiny metal shaving glinting in the dirt. She picked it up with her handkerchief, recognizing it as a bit from a lock-picking tool. Someone had been careless. Back in the drawing room, the guests began to arrive. Sarah and Lily stood nervously by the door. The Colonel puffed his pipe in a corner, and Dolly fussed with the teapot. Soon Mr. Finch and Tom Reed entered, Finch with his smooth smile, and Tom with his usual fidgety hands. Miss Marple greeted them warmly.
Oh.
Her face as harmless as a village granny's. "Thank you all for coming," she said, settling into a chair. "I thought we might sort out this business with the missing books. It's caused quite a stir, hasn't it?" The Colonel grunted. "Stir. It's a blasted nuisance." "Sarah, you'd better explain that key." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't take it, sir. I swear." Miss Marple raised a hand. "Let's not rush, Colonel. I've been thinking about these books. They're valuable, aren't they? Worth stealing if someone knew where to sell them." Mr. Finch leaned forward, his smile tight. "A shame they're gone, but old houses are full of forgetful maids, aren't they?" Lily gasped, and Sarah's face reddened. Miss Marple's eyes flicked to Tom, who was staring at his shoes. "Not always," she said softly. "Sometimes things are made to look a certain way, like a key hidden under a mattress. It's a bit obvious, don't you think?" Tom's head jerked up, his fingers twitching. Finch shot him a quick look, but Miss Marple pressed on, her voice calm. "I found a few things that puzzled me. Footprints by the library window, too big for a maid's shoes, scrap of cloth from a dark jacket. And this," she held up the metal shaving, wrapped in her handkerchief. "Okay, piece from a lock-picking tool left in the flower bed." Dolly gasped. "Lock-picking, Jane? You don't mean?" Miss Marple nodded. "Someone's been trying to get into the library, not just once, but several times. And last night, when the Colonel heard a noise, they ran off. Perhaps they heard about a watchman and got scared." Finch laughed, but it sounded forced. "Miss Marple, you have quite the imagination. Surely you're not suggesting I'm—" "Suggesting," she said, her eyes locking onto his, "that someone knew about those books and wanted them badly. Someone who asked questions at the Blue Boar, visited the pawn shop, and even checked the manor's back gate." Tom's face went pale, his hands shaking. Finch's smile faded. Miss Marple went on, her voice steady. "I spoke with Mr. Turner. At the pawn shop, he mentioned a man with a beard, asking about selling first editions. And Lily saw a tall man in a dark coat by the library window twice. Then there's Tom, who claimed to be a gardener, but his hand's cleaner than a vicar's." Stammered, I didn't do anything." Miss Marple tilted her head. "Didn't you, Tom? You were at the manor near the back door. A minute's enough to slip a key under a mattress, especially if someone's paying you to do it." Finch stood, his face hard. "This is absurd." "You've no proof. Just guesses from an old lady who reads too many detective stories." The colonel bristled, but Miss Marple stayed calm. "It's not guesses, Mr. Finch. I've seen this before. Years ago, a man in our village charmed his way into houses, stealing trinkets with a helper who planted clues to blame others. You and Tom make a fine pair. You ask the questions, he does the sneaking. But you got greedy, didn't you? Those books were too tempting." Tom's shoulders slumped, his voice barely a whisper. "Wasn't my idea. He said it'd be easy, just a couple of books, then we'd leave." "Quiet, Tom," Finch snapped, but it was too late. Miss Marple smiled faintly. "The books are still here, aren't they? And somewhere close, waiting for you to sell. Them, perhaps, at the Blue Boar, or near the back gate you were so curious about." Finch's eyes narrowed, but before he could speak, the door opened. A policeman stepped in, summoned by Dolly's quick note earlier. "Mr. Finch, Mr. Reed," the officer said. "We'd like you to come with us. We found 2 rare books in a bag behind the inn, wrapped in a dark jacket." Tom buried his face in his hands. Finch glared, but his charm was gone. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes bright. "People always leave something behind," she said softly. "A footprint, a shaving, a lie. It's the little things that catch you." As the police led Finch and Tom away, Dolly hugged Miss Marple. "Jane, you're a marvel. How did you know?" Miss Marple smiled. "I just listened, Dolly. People tell you everything, if you know how to hear it." Chapter 7. A satisfying resolution. The sun set over St. Mary Mead, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cozy cottage, her knitting needles clicking softly by the fire. The village was quiet again, its usual hum restored after the whirlwind of the past few days. The missing books were back in the manor's library. Mr. Finch and Tom Reed were in custody, and the puzzle Miss Marple had pieced together was complete. Her sharp eyes gleamed with quiet satisfaction as she thought over the events. Earlier that day, the manor house had been a flurry of activity. After the police took Finch and Tom away, Dolly Bantry insisted on a proper tea to celebrate. The drawing room was warm with chatter, the teapot steaming, and the colonel's gruff voice softer than usual. "Miss Marple," he said, puffing his pipe, "you've got a mind like a steel trap. I'd have sworn it was Sarah till you set us straight." Dolly beamed, her scarf finally untangled. "Jane, you saved us, and poor Sarah, she's back to work," smiling again. "How do you do it?" Miss Marple sipped her tea, her smile gentle. "They just watch people, Dolly. They're the same everywhere, whether in St. Mary Mead or a big city. Greed, fear, guilt they show in the little things. A nervous glance, a tuck-lean hand, a question that's too sharp." The police had found the stolen books in a sack behind the Blue Boar Inn, just as Miss Marple suspected. The dark jacket, wrapped around them, matched the scrap of cloth she'd found in the flower bed. Tom Reed, crumbling under pressure, had confessed everything. Mr. Finch had planned the theft, targeting the colonel's rare books after hearing about them from a shady dealer in London. Tom, down on his luck, was roped in to do the dirty work sneaking through the library window, planting the key to frame Sarah. Their plan was to sell the books to a collector. But Miss Marple's rumor about a watchman had spooked them, leading to their sloppy attempt the night before. Sarah and Lily had joined the tea, their faces bright with relief. Sarah hugged Miss Marple, her rosy cheeks glowing. "I thought I'd lose my place here, ma'am. Thank you for believing me." Lily, shy as ever, added, "I knew you'd figure it out, Miss Marple. How do you notice everything?" Miss Marple chuckled. "Not everything, dear. Just enough." As she walked home from the manor, the village felt lighter. Children played in the square, and Mrs. Price waved from the tea shop, already spreading the tale of Miss Marple's cleverness. At the Blue Boar, the innkeeper was scrubbing tables, glad to be rid of his troublesome guests. Even old Mr. Turner at the pawnshop had a spring in his step, relieved he hadn't bought stolen goods. Now in her cottage, Miss Marple set her knitting down and gazed out the window. The stars were peeking through, tiny lights in the dark. Thought of a village scandal years ago when a charming stranger had swindled half the town before she'd caught him out. People were predictable, she mused. They hid their secrets, but those secrets always slipped through like a dropped stitch in a scarf. She remembered Dolly's question. "How do you do it?" It wasn't magic, just years of watching St. Mary Mead, learning its rhythms, its people. Mr. Finch thought he could outsmart a sleepy village, but he didn't know its heart or its sharpest mind. Miss Marple's justice was quiet, but it was sure. The books were back, Sarah was cleared, and the village was safe again. A knock at the door startled her. It was young Tommy, the grocer's boy, holding a small basket of apples. "Mrs. Price said to bring you these, Miss Marple," he said, grinning. "She says you're the cleverest lady in St. Mary Mead." Miss Marple laughed, taking the apples. "Tell Mrs. Price she's too kind. And Tommy, stay out of trouble, won't you?" It winked and ran off, his laughter echoing down the lane. Miss Marple closed the door, her smile lingering. She picked up her knitting, the needles clicking once more. The fire crackled, the village slept, and Miss Marple was ready for whatever mystery came next. In St. Mary Mead there was always another story waiting. "Oh," she said softly too. Herself and people think village life is dull. Her eyes twinkled as she looped another stitch, the rhythm steady like the beat of her clever heart. Chapter 8. A New Shadow in St. Mary Mead. The morning sun shone gently on St. Mary Mead, its light dancing on the cobblestones. Miss Jane Marple sat in her garden, her knitting needles clicking like a soft heartbeat. The village was calm after the fuss over the manor's stolen books. The chatter at Daisy's tea shop had settled into its usual hum of gossip. Mr. Finch and Tom Reed were gone. Locked up in the county jail and Colonel Bantry's library. Was safe, but Miss Marple's sharp eyes never rested for long. She'd learned that quiet villages hid the best secrets. As she sipped her tea, a bicycle bell jingled down the lane. It was young Tommy, the grocer's boy, his cheeks flushed from "Pedaling, Miss Marple," he called, skidding to a stop. "Mrs. Price says there's trouble at the post office. You ought to come quick." Miss Marple set her knitting down, her heart quickening. "Trouble, Tommy? What kind?" "Letters gone missing," said, eyes wide. "Important ones, with fancy seals. Mrs. Clements in a tizzy?" She adjusted her hat and grabbed her basket. The post office was a small brick building in the village square. Its counter, always busy with neighbors sending parcels or chatting. Mrs. Clement, the vicar's wife, was there when Miss Marple arrived, her face pinched with worry. The postmistress, Miss Hartnell, stood behind the counter, sorting mail with a frown. "Jane, thank goodness," Mrs. Clement said, hurrying over. The 3 letters disappeared this week, important ones, addressed to the manor, the vicarage, and Mr. Turner at the pawnshop. They had wax seals, like from a lawyer or someone grand. Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted, stolen from the post office. Miss Hartnell nodded, her voice sharp. "I locked the mailbag every night, but yesterday I found it open, and those letters were gone. I'd blame young Billy, my assistant, but he's been sick all week." Miss Marple's eyes scanned the counter, noting a faint scratch near the lock on the mailbag's clasp. "Who else comes in here?" she asked. "Just customers," Miss Hartnell said. "Though there was a new woman yesterday, saying she was visiting her aunt. Asked a lot of questions about how we sort the mail." Mrs. Clement chimed in. "I saw her too, near the church. She was tall, with a green scarf, writing in a little book. Seemed curious." Miss Marple's lips pursed. Curious stranger. Again, she thought of Mr. Finch, with his slick questions, and how trouble followed newcomers. What did she look like, besides the scarf? Tall dark hair, maybe 30, Mrs. Clement said. Called herself Miss Gray, said she's staying at the Blue Boar. Miss Marple thanked them and headed to Daisy's tea shop, where gossip flowed like tea. Mrs. Price was at the counter, her apron dusted with flour. Heard about the post office, Miss Marple? She said, pouring a cup. That Miss Gray was in here this morning, asking about the manor and the vicarage. Said she's writing a history book, but her eyes were everywhere. Miss Marple settled at her corner table, her tea steaming. Did she say anything else? Mrs. Price leaned in, asked if Mr. Turner deals in old papers or letters. Funny. Things she had ink on her fingers, like she'd been writing a lot. Miss Marple's mind clicked. Ink on fingers, a green scarf, questions about letters. She remembered a village girl who'd stolen love letters to sell for gossip. Important. Letters with seals could hold secrets, wills, deeds, or worse. Thank you, Mrs. Price, she said. Her smile hiding her racing thoughts, she walked to the Blue Boar Inn, hoping to spot Miss Gray. The inn was quiet, its tables empty except for a tall woman in a green scarf sitting by the window. She was writing in a notebook, her face sharp and focused. Miss Marple approached, her smile warm as ever. Good morning, she said. It must be Miss Gray. I'm Jane Marple, a friend of the Bantrys. I hear you're writing a book. Miss Gray looked up, her eyes cool but polite. Yes, a history of old villages. St. Mary Mead's charming, isn't it? Very, Miss Marple said, sitting down, though we've had some trouble lately. Missing letters, I hear. Quite valuable ones. Miss Gray's pen paused, just for a moment. How unfortunate, she said. Letters do get lost, don't they? Miss Marple tilted her head. Not usually, not when they're locked away. You were at the post office, weren't you, asking about the mail? Miss Gray's smile tightened. Just curious about village life, for my book. They chatted a bit longer, Miss Marple's questions gentle but pointed. Miss Gray answered smoothly, but her fingers tapped the table, a tiny sign of nerves. Miss Marple thought of Tom Reed's fidgety hands and how guilt showed in small ways as she left the inn. Miss Marple noticed a scrap of paper by the door, dropped from Miss Gray's notebook. It had a wax smudge, red, like a seal. She tucked it into her basket, her heart beating faster. Back at her cottage, she sat by the fire, her knitting untouched. The missing letters, the scratched lock, the wax smudge, it was a new puzzle. And Miss Gray was a piece of it. She decided to visit the vicarage tomorrow. Mrs. Clement, I know more about the letter's contents. For now, she'd keep an eye on Miss Gray. Strangers with too many questions rarely stayed innocent in St. Mary. Mead. Miss Marple smiled, her needles clicking again. The village was quiet, but a new shadow had fallen, and she was ready to chase it. Chapter 9. Tightening the net, the morning mist curled around St. Mary Mead, softening the edges of the village's cobblestone lanes. Miss Jane Marple stepped out of her cottage, her basket tucked under her arm and her sensible hat firmly in place. The missing letters from the post office weighed on her mind, important ones with wax seals gone without a trace. The new stranger, Miss Gray, with her green scarf and ink-stained fingers, was at the heart of it, Miss Marple was sure. Her sharp eyes had caught the wax smudge on the scrap of paper, and her instincts told her the net was closing. She headed to the vicarage, where Mrs. Clement was sure to know more about the stolen letters. The vicarage was a cozy house beside the church, its garden full of roses. Mrs. Clement was pruning bushes, her gloves muddy, when Miss Marple arrived. Jane, you're a sight for sore eyes, she said, brushing dirt from her hands. This business with the letters has me all aflutter. Miss Marple smiled gently. Tell me about the letter addressed to you, Mrs. Clement. What was it about? Mrs. Clement frowned, setting her pruning shears down. It was from a lawyer in London, about an inheritance for the church, donation from an old parishioner, who passed last month. It had a red wax seal, very official. Never saw it, though just got a note saying it was sent. Miss Marple's mind clicked. An inheritance letter could mean money, and money drew thieves like moths to a flame. "Did you mention it to anyone?" she asked. "Only Miss Hartnell at the post office," Mrs. Clemens said. "But that Miss Gray was nearby when I spoke to her, writing in her notebook." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes sharp. Miss Gray again. Always close to the trouble. She thought of a village boy who'd overheard a neighbor's money troubles and swiped a purse. Eavesdropping was a thief's best trick. "Thank you, dear," she said. "I'll pop by the post office next." At the post office, Miss Hartnell was sorting letters, her face still cross. "Miss Marple, I hope you've got ideas," she said. "The police came, but they're stumped. They think Billy's to blame, even though he's been sick." Miss Marple glanced at the mailbag's scratched clasp. "Has anyone else been in here lately? Besides Miss Gray?" Miss Hartnell thought for a moment. "Just the usual folks. Oh, and a delivery man yesterday, dropping off a parcel. He was quick. Didn't say much. Wore a dark cap and a blue coat." Miss Marple's heart quickened. A delivery man, unnoticed by most, could slip in and out easily. She remembered Mr. Finch's partner, the man in the dark coat she'd seen in the square. Was he back, or was this someone new? Did he touch the mailbag? She asked. "Not that I saw," Miss Hartnell said. "But I was busy with customers." Miss Marple thanked her and stepped outside, her mind racing. A delivery man, a scratched clasp, Miss Gray's notebook. She was weaving a new web, she decided. To visit the Blue Boar Inn again, hoping to catch Miss Gray off guard. The inn was busier today, with travelers chatting over mugs of ale. Miss Gray sat in her usual corner, her green scarf bright against her dark hair. She was reading a letter. Her face tensed. Miss Marple approached, her smile warm. "Good morning, Miss Gray. Still working on your book?" Miss Gray folded the letter quickly, tucking it into her bag. "Yes, Miss Marple. Just gathering notes." Miss Marple sat down, her eyes catching a glimpse of red wax on the letter's edge. "Interesting work, village history," she said. "You must see all sorts of papers. Letters, perhaps, with fancy seals?" Miss Gray's fingers tightened on her bag. "Sometimes," she said, her voice cool. "Old letters can tell stories." Miss Marple nodded, her tone light. "They can, though some stories are best left unopened. I heard the post office lost a few important ones. A shame, isn't it?" Miss Gray's eyes flicked to the door, a tiny slip of nerves. "Very unfortunate," she said. "I'm sure they'll turn up." They chatted a bit longer, Miss Marple's questions gentle but probing. Miss Gray stayed calm, but her tapping foot betrayed her. Miss Marple thought of Tom Reed, whose twitchy hands had given him away. Small signs always told the truth. As she left the inn, Miss Marple spotted a man in a blue coat and dark cap near the stable, loading a cart. He glanced her way, then turned quickly, his movements sharp. She made a mental note of his face, narrow, with a thin mustache. She'd seen him before, in the square with Mr. Finch, a partner, perhaps. Tying this new mystery to the last, back at her cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting untouched. She pulled the wax-smudged paper from her basket, studying it under the lamp. The red seal matched Mrs. Clemens' description. She thought of a village scandal where a maid had stolen letters to blackmail a neighbor. Letters held power, and Miss Gray or her delivery man wanted that power. She decided to set another trap. At Daisy's tea shop, she found Mrs. Price, always eager for news. "Mrs. Price," she said softly, "I heard the police are checking parcels at the station tomorrow. Looking for stolen letters, they say." Mrs. Price's eyes lit up. "Stolen letters. I'll tell everyone." Marple smiled. Gossip would spread, and if Miss Gray or her friend heard, they might panic and slip up. She remembered a thief who dropped stolen coins when he heard the police were near. Fear made people clumsy. As dusk fell, Miss Marple lit her lamp. The village was quiet, but a new mystery was brewing. Tomorrow, she'd watch the Blue Boar. And the station. Miss Gray's calm mask was cracking, and the delivery man was a loose thread. Miss Marple's needles clicked once, her eyes gleaming. St. Mary Mead never stayed quiet for long. Chapter 10. The final thread, the dawn broke softly over St. Mary Mead, casting a golden glow on the village's quiet lanes. Miss Jane Marple sat by her cottage window, her knitting needles still, her sharp eyes fixed on the horizon. The missing letters. The scratched mailbag clasped Miss Gray's ink-stained fingers. And the mysterious delivery man in the blue coat had woven a tight web of clues. Her rumor about the police checking parcels at the station should have stirred the culprits by now. Today, she aimed to unravel the final thread and bring the truth to light. Miss Marple slipped on her sensible shoes and tucked her notebook into her basket. She headed to the village square, where the post office and the Blue Boar Inn faced each other like old friends. The air buzzed with early morning chatter. Mrs. Price's gossip about the police search had spread like wildfire. Miss Marple smiled. Faintly. A nervous thief was a careless one, and she was counting on a mistake at the post office. Miss Hartnell was sorting mail, her face still pinched with worry. Miss Marple, the police were here at sunrise, she said. We're watching the station now, looking for those letters. I hope they catch whoever did this. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes scanning the counter. Any sign of that delivery? Man again? The one in the blue coat? Miss Hartnell shook her head. Not since yesterday. But Miss Gray came by, asking if we'd found any lost letters. She seemed jumpy. Miss Marple's heart quickened. Jumpy was Whodunit, meant her trap was working. She thanked Miss Hartnell and crossed the square to the Blue Boar Inn. The inn was quiet. Its breakfast crowd not yet arrived. Miss Gray sat by the window, her green scarf loosed around her neck, her notebook open. She was writing quickly, her face tense. Good morning, Miss Gray, Miss Marple said, her voice warm as she sat down. Still working on your history book? Miss Gray's pen froze, her eyes flicking up. Yes, Miss Marple. Just finishing some notes. Miss Marple tilted her head, her smile gentle but her gaze sharp. You must have quite a collection of papers. I found a curious scrap the other day, with a red wax smudge. It looked like it came from a letter, maybe one of those missing from the post office. Miss Gray's fingers tightened on her pen, a tiny tremble betraying her. I don't know anything about that, she said, her voice too quick. Miss Marple leaned forward slightly. It's odd, isn't it? Letters with seals don't just vanish. And that delivery mantle, thin mustache, blue coats, seems to know more than he says. He was seen near the post office and in the square with another man not long ago. Miss Gray's face paled, and she closed her notebook. I really must go, she said, standing. I have work to do. As she hurried out, Miss Marple noticed a small parcel slip from her bag, landing under the table. She waited until Miss Gray was gone, then picked it up. It was wrapped in plain paper, but a corner showed the edge of an envelope with a red wax seal. She tucked it into her basket, her mind racing. The trap had worked. Miss Gray was rattled. And the parcel was proof. Miss Marple headed to the station. It's a small platform at the village's edge where the morning train was due. The police were there, checking bags as travelers arrived. She spotted the delivery man in his blue coat, carrying a sack and looking nervous. His eyes darted around, and when he saw Miss Marple, he froze for a split second before turning away. Approached a policeman, a young officer she knew from the village. Constable Reed, she said softly. That man in the blue coat, he's worth watching, and this parcel might interest you. She handed over the package, the wax-sealed envelope peeking out. The officer opened it, his eyes widening. This is one of the missing letters. Where did you? Fell from Miss Gray's bag, Miss Marple said.
Oh.
I think you'll find the others with that man over there. The policeman signaled to his partner, and they approached the delivery man, who tried to bolt, but was quickly caught. The sack he carried held 2 more letters, each with a red wax seal. Miss Gray, seeing the commotion from across the platform, turned to run, but was stopped by another officer, back at the vicarage. Miss Marple sat with Mrs. Clement and Dolly Bantry, who'd rushed over when the news broke. The police had questioned Miss Gray and the delivery man, whose name was Mr. Cole. He confessed first, his thin mustache twitching as he spoke. Miss Gray had hired him to steal the letters, knowing they held details of inheritances and land deals. She wasn't writing a book, she was after money, planning to blackmail the recipients or sell the letters to a shady dealer. The scratched mailbag clasp was Cole's work. and Miss Gray had eavesdropped to learn which letters to take. Mrs. Clement clasped her hands. "Jane, you're a wonder. The church's donation is safe now, thanks to you." Dolly hugged her. "You've saved us twice in a month. St. Mary Mead's lucky to have you." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes twinkling. "It's just a matter of listening, dear. People always say more than they mean to." As she walked home, the village glowed in the afternoon light. Children laughed in the square, and Mrs. Price waved from the tea shop, already telling the story of Miss Marple's latest triumph. At her cottage, she sat by the fire, her knitting needles clicking again. The letters were back, the culprits caught, and St. Mary Mead was peaceful once more. She thought of a village girl who'd stolen a diary, thinking it held secrets. People chased what they shouldn't, but secrets had a way of coming out. Mr. Pot. Marple's justice was quiet, steady, like her knitting. Oh. She chuckled softly, looping another stitch. "And they say villages are boring," she murmured, her eyes bright as the firelight.